The dust of the high desert was a fine, red powder that coated everything, a second skin of grit and heat. It worked its way into the action of their rifles, the seals of their optics, and the dry, cracked corners of their mouths. Master Chief Petty Officer Cade Thorne, callsign Ares, 1, tasted it on his tongue and ignored it. It was a constant, like the oppressive weight of the sun or the low-grade hum of anxiety that preceded every mission. His team, SEAL Team 3's Ares Detachment, moved with the fluid economy of predators. They were 6 men, each a carefully honed instrument of violence, moving through the labyrinthine canyons of the Alborz Mountains like ghosts in the midday glare. This was supposed to be simple. A snatch and grab. Infiltrate. Acquire the high-value target. A regional warlord with a penchant for improvised explosives, and exfiltrate before the local hornet's nest knew it had been kicked. Simple. Thorne hated simple missions. They had a tendency to become complicated with lethal speed. He scanned the ridges above them, his eyes tracing the jagged lines of rock that clawed at the bleached blue sky. The terrain was the real enemy here. These canyons were ancient riverbeds, carved deep into the rock, creating a tactical nightmare of blind corners, choke points, and natural ambush sites. It was a place that swallowed sound and played tricks on the eyes. High above, a single A-10 Thunderbolt II circled, a patient hawk on station. Hog 2 to 5. Air support was a box to be checked, a comforting but often distant presence. He hadn't worked with this pilot before. The mission brief had listed her as Captain Eva Rostova. The name meant nothing to him. To a man like Thorne, whose life and the lives of his men depended on the bonds of shared blood and battle, an unknown pilot was just a voice on the radio, a variable in an equation he preferred to keep as simple as possible. He trusted the men around him, their movements as familiar to him as his own breathing. He trusted his rifle. He trusted his training. He would trust the A-10 pilot only when she proved she was worthy of it. Until then, she was just insurance, and he hoped they wouldn't need to file a claim. 2 minutes to target, whispered Petty Officer Reaper Sanchez, his point man, over their encrypted comms. Thorne gave a silent hand signal, and the team melted into the shadows of an overhanging rock formation, their camouflage patterns making them dissolve into the terrain. The target compound was just ahead, a small, mud-walled collection of buildings nestled at the confluence of 3 canyons. It looked quiet, too quiet. The premonition, the same cold dread that had kept him alive in a dozen other hellholes, prickled the back of his neck. Something was wrong. The world erupted not with a bang, but with a synchronized roar of gunfire from a dozen hidden positions. It was a perfect L-shaped ambush, a textbook execution of tactical geometry designed to maximize killing power. The quiet compound was a decoy, the entire canyon a baited trap. Heavy machine gun fire tore through the air from the northern ridge, the heavy slugs chewing chunks of rock from the formation the SEALs used as cover. From the east, a barrage of RPGs screamed down, their explosions walking a fiery line toward their position. The southern ridge, which they had believed to be their safe flank, erupted with the distinct, rapid crackle of AK-74s. They were pinned, enveloped. The simple mission had just become a desperate fight for survival in a 360-degree kill box. Contact north, east, and south. Thorne yelled into his mic, the words almost lost in the deafening cacophony. All stations, return fire. Find cover. Shrapnel from a near-miss RPG zipped past his head, and he felt a hot sting on his cheek. Reaper was already down, a dark stain spreading across his leg. Doc Evans, their corpsman, was scrambling toward him, staying impossibly low. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and hot metal, a familiar, acrid perfume of disaster. Thorne's mind worked with cold, furious speed, processing the catastrophic failure. The intel hadn't just been bad. It had been a deliberate plant. They had been fed to the wolves. His priorities shifted instantly from offense to survival. Exfil was impossible. Their only hope was to hold their ground and pray for support. But the canyon walls, their enemy just moments before, now seemed to mock them, blocking any clear line of sight for air support and amplifying the sound of the incoming fire until it was a physical pressure against their bodies. He tried to raise command on the SATCOM, but the radio hissed back with angry static. Jamming. Of course. They had thought of everything. The enemy was well-trained, well-equipped, and had chosen their ground perfectly. The initial volley of fire had been a statement of intent. Now they were settling in, pouring a sustained, accurate fusillade into the SEALs' meager position. The sheer volume of fire was staggering. Thorne knew they couldn't last long. They were heavily outnumbered, outgunned, and their only cover was a collection of rocks that was being systematically pulverized into dust. The bullets ricocheted around them, whining like angry insects. Hope, which had been a tangible presence just minutes before, was now a dwindling resource, bleeding out into the red dust just like his wounded point man. He risked a quick look over their cover. He saw dozens of enemy fighters, dug in, firing with disciplined intensity. This wasn't a random militia. This was a professional force, and they were closing the jaws of the trap. The firefight settled into a grim, lopsided rhythm. The SEALs, masters of controlled violence, were now reduced to a desperate defense. Every shot they fired was measured, a careful expenditure of a rapidly shrinking supply of ammunition. The enemy, by contrast, fired with impunity, their endless streams of tracer rounds crisscrossing the canyon, pinning the team down completely. Petty Officer Ghost Ramirez, their communications specialist, was trying everything to break through the jamming. He cycled through frequencies, rerouted antennas, even tried short, encrypted data bursts. Nothing. The enemy's electronic warfare was as effective as their machine guns. They were cut off, alone in the bottom of a bowl, with the enemy holding the rim. Doc Evans had managed to stabilize Reaper, but the wound was bad. A femoral artery hit. Without immediate evacuation, he would die. Another SEAL, Bull, had taken shrapnel to the shoulder, and his left arm was useless. 2 men down, for still fighting, against what Thorne now estimated to be over 100 enemy combatants. The odds weren't just long, they were non-existent. At the Tactical Operations Center hundreds of miles away, Colonel Jennings watched the team's icons on the digital map blink red. Their biometric sensors were flatlining or sending erratic data. He could hear only fragmented, garbled transmissions. Pinned down, multiple casualties, heavy resistance. The words painted a grim picture. He had F-16s on standby, but they were 20 minutes out, and they couldn't work effectively inside the tight canyon. An Apache gunship squadron was an hour away. The only asset they had on station was Hog 2-5, the lone A-10. He looked at her fuel and armament status. She was loaded for bear, but the rules of engagement for a danger-close situation with a pilot who had never worked with the team on the ground were a razor's edge. A single mistake, a single bomb off by a few meters, and he'd be writing letters to 6 grieving families. He felt the cold, heavy weight of command settle on his shoulders. He was about to lose a whole team. On the ground, Thorne knew it too. He had been in bad spots before, but this was different. This felt like an ending. He saw the enemy fighters beginning to move, advancing from their ridgeline positions, using the terrain to creep closer for the final assault. He chambered his last magazine. He looked at the faces of his men, faces he knew better than his own. They were grim, determined, but he could see the knowledge in their eyes. They were preparing to sell their lives as dearly as possible. All hope was gone. The only thing left was to die fighting. It was in this moment of absolute despair, a moment stretched thin between the last few heartbeats of their lives, that a new voice cut through the static, not on the jammed SATCOM, but on the short-range, line-of-sight frequency for air support. It was a woman's voice, impossibly calm. "Ares, 1, this is Hog 2-5. I read you faint through the jamming. Talk to me." The voice was a ghost, a phantom signal in the storm of chaos. For a moment, Thorne thought he was imagining it. It was too clear, too composed, completely at odds with the violent reality on the ground. It was the voice of someone who was not experiencing the same reality he was. He keyed his mic, his frustration and desperation boiling over into raw anger. Get out of here. The channel's jammed. We are pinned down in a box canyon, multiple casualties, enemy on all high ground. I repeat, enemy holds the ridges north, east, and south. Air support is non-viable. The canyon is a death trap. His transmission was a burst of raw data and fury. He was waving her off. In his mind, a pilot circling above the mess would only add another layer of complication. The risk of a friendly fire incident in this terrain, with this much confusion, was immense. A bomb dropped from 20,000 feet by a pilot who couldn't see the full picture was just as likely to kill them as the enemy. He was dismissing her, telling her she couldn't help, that her presence was useless. He was protecting his men from one threat while being consumed by another. He expected her to acknowledge his warning and retreat to a safe distance, to become a spectator to their demise. But the calm voice returned, unflustered by his tone, undeterred by his assessment. Solid copy, Ares 1. Pinpointed in a box canyon. Enemy on the high ground. Assessing the situation. There was no panic in her voice, no hesitation. Just a cool, methodical processing of information. It was the voice of a surgeon assessing a critical patient, not a bystander watching a car crash. The dissonance was jarring. Thorne was on the verge of ordering her away again, of telling her to clear the airspace. When she spoke again, her voice still impossibly serene, but now with an edge of command that cut through his anger. Ares 1, I see you. I've been painting your position with my targeting pod. I've also been mapping muzzle flashes for the last 10 minutes. I have a clear fire solution. Your call, Master Chief. Do you want to die down there? Or do you want to use the asset you have in the air? The challenge hung in the air, a direct, professional gauntlet thrown down. She had called him by his rank, a subtle reminder of the chain of command and of his responsibility. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a weapon, and she was asking for a target. High above the battlefield, Captain Eva Rostova was a universe away from the dust and blood below. In the armored titanium bathtub of her A-10 cockpit, she was cocooned in the cool, controlled environment of technology and procedure. The chaos on the ground reached her not as a terrifying, visceral experience, but as streams of data flickering across her heads-up display and multifunction screens. She saw the world through the super-magnified, infrared eye of her lightning targeting pod. She saw the SEAL's position, a cluster of heat signatures huddled behind a crumbling rock formation. She saw the muzzle flashes from the enemy positions, painting them onto her digital map with lethal precision. She had been building this picture for the past 10 minutes, circling patiently, listening to the fragmented radio calls, cross-referencing every piece of information. While the SEALs had been fighting for their lives, she had been conducting a cold, meticulous analysis of their tomb. Her plane, the A-10, was not a sleek, high-tech marvel of speed. It was a flying tank, a brutalist piece of engineering designed for one purpose: to kill things on the ground and survive while doing it. It was an extension of her own will, and she was a master of the instrument. She ignored Thorne's initial, angry dismissal. It was the predictable response of a man on the ground who felt abandoned and overwhelmed. She knew that to him, she was just a disembodied voice, a faceless variable. She had to earn his trust, and she had to do it in seconds. So she began her first pass. Ares 1, I am commencing a low-altitude reconnaissance pass. Do not fire. I am drawing their attention. She rolled the Warthog onto its side and dove into the canyon. It was a calculated risk. The canyon walls were dangerously tight, creating unpredictable wind shears. The enemy below would throw everything they had at her. But she needed to confirm what her sensors were telling her, to see the enemy with her own eyes. The A-10 screamed into the canyon, a gray specter of death. The sound of its twin turbofan engines was a deep, guttural roar that momentarily silenced the battle. The enemy fighters, surprised by the sudden, aggressive move, turned their weapons skyward. Muzzle flashes erupted from the ridges as they fired wildly at her. She saw it all, her brain processing the visual information at incredible speed. Her plane shuddered as a few rounds of small arms fire pinged harmlessly off its armored fuselage. She was a lightning rod, drawing the full, furious attention of the enemy, and in doing so, giving the SEALs a precious few seconds of reprieve. She pulled up sharply, the G-forces pressing her into her seat, and climbed back into the safety of the sky. The pass had confirmed everything. The enemy was exactly where she thought they were, and they were numerous. Now she had the complete picture. The question was whether Thorne would let her use it. Cade Thorne watched in stunned disbelief as the A-10, a machine he had associated with high-altitude, standoff bombing runs, dove headfirst into the canyon like a hunting hawk. The sheer audacity of the maneuver was breathtaking. For a few seconds, the relentless hail of bullets directed at his team was diverted, replaced by a skyward torrent of fire aimed at the defiant aircraft. It was a brief respite, but it was enough for him to think. The pilot's voice came back over the radio, as calm as if she were ordering lunch. Reconnaissance pass complete. I have confirmed multiple fortified positions on all 3 ridges. They look dug in for a long stay. I am ready to engage. Thorne was out of time. He could hear the enemy commanders shouting orders, regrouping for their final push. His men were checking their magazines, the metallic clicks echoing the finality of their situation. 2 were wounded, 1 critically. The rest were down to their last 30 rounds apiece. Death was no longer a possibility. It was an approaching certainty, a physical presence he could feel creeping in from the canyon ridges. He looked at Reaper's pale face, at the grim determination in the eyes of his remaining men. He had a choice. He could die with his pride, trusting only the men he could see, or he could trust the calm, confident voice in his ear. He could trust the ghost in the machine. It wasn't a choice at all. Hog 2 to 5, he ground out, his voice a rasp of desperation and reluctant faith. This is Ares 1. We are popping IR strobe. I say again, we are marked by infrared strobe. You are cleared hot. Danger close. He paused, taking a breath before uttering the words that would either save them or kill them. Target is the northern ridge. Machine gun nest. 40 meters from our position. 40 meters. Do you copy? He had thrown down the ultimate challenge. A 40-meter strike was not just danger close, it was suicidal. It required a level of precision that few pilots possessed. It was a test, a final, desperate gamble. If she was as good as her voice sounded, they might live. If she was anything less than perfect, they would be vaporized in a cloud of friendly fire. The entire canyon seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. The response came back instantly, with no hesitation, no doubt, only a chilling, professional finality. Solid copy, Ares 1. Danger close. 40 meters from your strobe. I see it. Hog 2 to 5 is in. The attack did not begin with the scream of a bomb or the roar of a rocket. It began with a sound that defied description, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the air. It was the BRRRT of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barreled Gatling gun the size of a small car, firing 30mm depleted uranium shells at a rate of 70 rounds per second. It was not the sound of a weapon, it was the sound of Armageddon. From her cockpit, Eva Rostova lined up the shot, her entire world compressed into the glowing green symbols of her heads-up display. The plane, her body, and the weapon were one. She didn't aim the gun, she flew the gun. The cannon was the very soul of the A-10, and she was its master. She squeezed the trigger, and for a 2-second burst, the Warthog unleashed a torrent of righteous fury. The stream of shells, a precise, devastating line of explosive power, walked directly across the machine gun nest on the northern ridge. The impact was absolute. The fortified position, the heavy weapon, and the men who manned it simply ceased to exist, vanishing in a cloud of pulverized rock and red mist. The ground beneath the seals shook as if from an earthquake. Dust and debris rained down on them, but the rounds had struck with surgical precision, exactly 40 meters from their position, not a single one falling short. It was a feat of flying and gunnery that bordered on the supernatural. Thorne and his men could only stare, their faces masks of stunned awe. Before the dust from the first attack had even begun to settle, Rostova was already lining up her next run. She didn't wait for instructions. She had the battlefield mapped in her mind and was now systematically dismantling it. Engaging Eastern Ridge with rockets, she stated calmly over the radio. She rolled the A-10 hard, pulling it into a tight, gut-wrenching turn that should have been impossible for an aircraft of its size. She swooped down the canyon from a new angle, unleashing a volley of Hydra rockets that obliterated a cluster of enemy fighters who had been preparing to launch another RPG attack. The explosions echoed like thunder, a symphony of destruction that was music to the SEAL's ears. She wasn't finished. On a third pass, she targeted the southern ridge, the one that had cut off their retreat. This time, she used her Maverick missiles, fire-and-forget weapons that she guided with her targeting pod until the last second. 2 perfect hits, and 2 more enemy positions were turned into craters. In less than 90 seconds, a single pilot in a single aircraft had completely broken the back of a meticulously planned ambush. She had transformed their kill box into a shooting gallery, and the enemy was on the receiving end. The relentless, overwhelming fire that had pinned them down for the better part of an hour was gone, replaced by a stunned, sporadic, and panicked return fire. She had given them breathing room. She had given them a chance. She had given them hope. The silence that descended on the canyon was more profound than the noise it replaced. It was a silence filled with the ringing in their ears and the thumping of their own hearts. The enemy was broken, their command structure shattered, their will to fight extinguished by the sheer, terrifying violence of the A-10's assault. They were now fleeing, disorganized and panicked, melting back into the mountains from whence they came. On the ground, Cade Thorne slowly got to his feet, his body aching, his ears ringing, but his mind sharp with a startling, new clarity. He looked at the smoking craters on the ridges, the scenes of utter devastation where their tormentors had been just moments before. He had been a SEAL for 20 years. He had seen the power of air support before, but he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't just support. It was salvation delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a god. Over the command channel, which was now miraculously clear of jamming, he heard the voice of Colonel Jennings. Hog 2-5, be advised, another air asset just identified your flying style. Is Captain Rostova's call sign Valkyrie? There was a brief pause, and then her calm voice returned, for the first time with a hint of something other than pure professionalism, perhaps a touch of weary irony. That's an affirmative, Colonel. It's been a while since anyone used that name. Valkyrie. The name echoed in Thorne's mind. He knew it, not personally, but by reputation. It was a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones in after-action reports and training simulations. Valkyrie was a legend, a ghost pilot from the early days of the Desert Wars. She had been part of a special program, testing extreme close-air support tactics in the tightest, most dangerous mountain environments imaginable. She had flown missions that were officially denied, in places that didn't exist on maps. She hadn't just mastered the doctrine of danger close-air support, she had written it, with the blood of her enemies and the roar of her GU-8. The condescending skepticism he had felt toward the unknown pilot was replaced by a wave of profound, humbling respect. He hadn't been saved by some random captain. He had been pulled from the fire by one of the finest combat pilots of the generation, a living legend who just happened to be on station when his world fell apart. He felt a flush of shame at his earlier anger, his dismissal of her. He had doubted her, questioned her, and she had responded by flying through the gates of hell to save him and his men. He keyed his mic, his own voice now quiet, stripped of all its hard-edged authority. Colonel, tell Valkyrie. Tell her Ares team owes her a debt. With the immediate threat eliminated, the rest of the operation moved with swift efficiency. The jamming had ceased, allowing Ghost to establish a clear line to command. Within 10 minutes, a Pavehawk helicopter was inbound, its rotors beating a rhythm of rescue. Under the watchful overwatch of the A-10 circling high above, the extraction proceeded flawlessly. The wounded, Reaper and Bull, were loaded first, their faces pale but alive. Doc Evans had saved Reaper's life, but it was Valkyrie who had given him the time to do it. As the last of his men boarded the chopper, Thorne stood on the ramp, looking back at the scarred canyon. It was a place where they should have died, a place that would be forever etched in his memory. He took one last look up at the sky, searching for the gray shape of the warthog. He saw her, a distant cross against the sun, a guardian angel with a cannon. He climbed into the helicopter, and as it lifted off, ascending from the dusty floor of their would-be tomb, he keyed his radio for one last transmission. He used the short-range frequency, a direct line to her. Valkyrie, he said, his voice now filled with a raw, unvarnished respect that was more meaningful than any official commendation. Ares team is away. Thank you. The reply came back instantly, her voice still a model of professional composure, yet somehow, he felt the acknowledgement in her tone. It was the quiet understanding between two warriors who had faced death together, even if miles apart. Good copy, Ares 1. Glad you all made it. Godspeed. Hog 2-5 is returning to base. She didn't linger on the moment. She didn't need his gratitude. The successful extraction, the fact that 6 men were going home instead of being buried in the dust, was the only reward her quiet professionalism required. The mission was complete. Her job was done. Thorn watched as her plane dipped its wings in a silent, subtle salute, then turned east, heading for home. The pave hawk banked hard, carrying them away from the canyon, away from the fight, back toward the world of the living. Thorn said nothing for the rest of the flight. He simply sat, the weight of the debt he owed settling upon him, a weight he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. Back at Bagram Airfield, the harsh sun beat down on the tarmac, creating shimmering waves of heat that distorted the distant mountains. The base was a hive of activity, but for Ares' team, the world had slowed to a crawl. Their wounded were in the hands of the surgical teams, their initial reports had been filed, and now there was only the quiet, heavy reality of the aftermath. Thorn stood near the flight line, watching the ground crews swarm over the A-10 that had saved them. He could see the patchwork of small holes on its fuselage, the scars from the bullets that had been meant for him and his men. He felt a strange connection to the ugly, formidable aircraft. It was more than just a machine, it was the avatar of his savior. The base commander, Colonel Jennings, walked up and stood beside him. They watched the ground crew for a moment in silence. "Captain Rostova's report is already on my desk," Jennings said, his voice low. "It's a masterpiece of understatement. Says your team designated targets with exemplary professionalism under extreme duress." Thorn closed his eyes. She was giving them credit. In her official report, there would be no mention of his initial doubt, his angry dismissal. She was protecting him, protecting the reputation of his team. It was the ultimate act of a quiet professional. "She's the reason we're standing here, sir," Thorn said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "Nothing more to it." "I know," Jennings replied. "Some pilots fly planes, Master Chief. She is something else entirely." Later, Thorn saw her. She was walking away from the debriefing hut, just a lone figure in a dusty green flight suit, her helmet bag slung over her shoulder. She was smaller than he had imagined, unassuming, easily lost in the bustling crowd of the airbase. There was no swagger in her step, no hint of the godlike power she had unleashed just hours before. She was just a soldier, her work for the day complete. He felt an urge to walk over, to say something more, to try and put into words the depth of his gratitude. But he knew it would be pointless. Words were inadequate. He remembered the quiet dip of her wings over the canyon. That was their language. That was all that needed to be said. He stood by the humming machinery of the flight line and simply watched her walk away until she disappeared into the blinding glare of the afternoon sun. He didn't salute. It would have felt too formal, too impersonal. Instead, he just gave a slow, deliberate nod, a silent acknowledgement, a gesture of profound and everlasting respect for the ghost who had come out of the sky and pulled his men from the canyon of death.